I knew my mum was the daughter of proud Turkish parents. And I knew my father descended or came from a nation of people called the Oromon. That's O-R-O-M-O. And as a child, I knew the Oromo people were the largest indigenous population in Ethiopia, actually across all of East Africa. I knew that the coffee that we all like to enjoy and drink today originated from my father's homeland. And I know that most of the athletes that you guys know as Ethiopian Olympic champions most likely trained in my father's hometown. But there were also things I didn't know as a child. For example, I didn't know that despite having a university degree, that my father was once a refugee. I didn't know that the language that he spoke, Afaan Oromo, was spoken by 40 million other people, and that for 100 years they were banned from speaking their language until 1991. I didn't know that successive Ethiopian governments prosecuted people who spoke this language, and that if anyone even dared to publish in that language, that they can face a result much worse than prison. But anyway, I learnt this language. I learnt it fluently during the ban from my dad here in Australia. In fact, all my siblings did. And what was striking about our ability to speak the Oromo language fluently was that my dad was able to create that in an environment that didn't support his results. He was a man who was uprooted from his country, chose to marry a woman from a completely different ethnic background, and then went to a completely foreign country that he decided to make home. And as an adult, when I reflect on this, in and of itself, it's not that hard to learn a language. It's not that hard to identify as a Muslim woman either, especially when everyone has an opinion on what you wear. It's not particularly difficult to exercise regularly, eat good food, be a wonderful person. I think what makes these things either easy or difficult is the context in which it happens. Some of you watching may know about an initiative that I founded called Afaan Publications, or that I created Oromo books for children all around the world. Or perhaps that I was able to rally a global movement to revitalise and create a language revolution for children. I was able to do those things. And what struck me the most in that time was that despite a very public journey that I had, there were things that I didn't share with people. I learnt certain lessons that I'd like to share with you today. The first lesson I learnt was a harsh one. And I learnt that lesson in front of a group of 20 primary school-aged children as their volunteer weekend school teacher. I had a lot of expectations. I expected that I would be given the resources to teach these children as a volunteer person, as a volunteer teacher. Actually, I expected to be treated like a hero because I was a volunteer teacher. I expected that the products and resources that would be given to me would be appropriate for the audiences that I was supposed to be teaching. And years after realising that none of those were true and none of those would ever happen, the fact that I realised there was a gap in publications, I had an expectation that the government, that a publishing house, an organisation, somebody would do something about the fact that these didn't exist. And that's when I learnt my first lesson. I realised that by having expectations of others, I began to excuse myself from responsibility. I realised that standing in front of those children, I'd actually turned into my own worst nightmare. I became an armchair critic, a fence sitter, a warrior on the keyboard. And often I would complain and say things like, I realised, or actually I learnt rather, that I had become one of those people who said, the Oromo people should be doing this and the Oromo people should be doing that. When in fact, I could be doing something myself. Something, not everything. And I would often complain to my father about this, and he would receive my complaints and he would respond by laughing. And he would say to me in Afaan Oromo, Toltu, quba tokko yoo namatti akeekte, quba sadii ufitti akeekaa jirta kana beekadhu toltu tiyya. Essentially, he was saying, Toltu, every time you point a finger at somebody, how many fingers do you think you're pointing back at yourself? And it was in that moment that I stopped waiting for other people to do something. And then I took responsibility. And in taking that responsibility, my life and my world changed very, very quickly. I realized that at that time, I didn't know it. But what eventually started a revolution around the world started from me picking up a pen, picking up a piece of paper, and actually writing those worksheets for those children by myself. The second lesson that I learnt was that by taking responsibility, I was able to use what I had in order to create something I didn't have. And let me tell you, when you start out doing an initiative, you never ever have all the tools available in front of you that you need. You never have the tools available in front of you. And as a university student, I was 26 years old, there were a lot of things that I didn't have. I didn't have the mass money to be able to produce the books that I really wanted to release to the public. But you know what I did have? I had time. I had the time to be creative, and in order to create fundraisers all around the world to raise that money. I didn't have the expertise as an Oromo language literacy expert that I so desperately wanted. But I did have multiple university degrees. I had experience from within our community, and I had access to network experts that I could try and rally and bring on board with what I was doing. And I certainly didn't have any examples of Oromo books that I could teach for children. But I had beautiful blueprints from other communities who'd started doing work for their own. And it was in that time that I wonder and I ask myself, and perhaps watching a lot of you sitting here, I wonder, how many of you are holding the ingredient in your hands? How many of you are holding in your hands the ingredients to fulfill the dreams of success in your own hands? And instead of doing something with it, we just choose to admire each and every ingredient we have. We talk about them, show them to other people, rather than actually cooking and making something out of it. It was from my father, who was my role model. It was from my father that I learnt to make do with whatever was in the situation around me, to make what didn't exist with whatever was in my hands. But the determination that I had to continue was given to me by the Oromo people in Oromia. Today, the Oromo people continue to pay a price heavier than money in order to assert their identity. I found it really difficult to reconcile my supposedly first world problems with the fact that Oromo people are literally paying with their lives today. What you and I will call statistics is actually people, and I've been to their country and I have seen it with my own eyes. That we call them numbers, but they are women who've lost their children permanently. They're children who have been told that their parents will no longer come back again. And there are mothers who will never see their family members ever again. And I remember the first time I created the products, the artwork for my books that I showed my dad. The first time I showed him these, my dad cried. He cried and he cried. And he said, "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my whole life." And I was fearful, because no one had ever seen what I was going to do. Not that special, think about the schools that we're all raised in. But the fact that his own relatives don't have toenails, don't have fingernails, that you go to the beach and you watch these guys strip off to go and enjoy themselves in the water, and you see welts all over their back. That you meet a guy and he tells you that he's impotent. I knew in that moment that I could use what I had to create something that never existed. The third lesson I learnt was almost counterintuitive. I realised that I'd become much, much more successful when I empowered the people around me to become successful. And to be quite frank, I didn't really need the Oromo people to develop my books. I could have just approached a few people, developed the product, found a rich sponsor, put it out there in front of the world, and boom, job done. But I knew that in my plan it was integral to create change in a way that empowered people to make their own versions of success. That was important to me. And I knew that by speaking the Oromo language, I was able to tap into a network of 40 million people who had a vested interest in seeing me succeed. I knew that if they saw me succeed, that they too would also be successful. And even if they weren't Oromo, even if they didn't care for my books or for my community or for my culture, they could still be inspired by my journey. Because I navigated a male-dominated world. I was a woman of colour, a Muslim woman, and someone who is a proud civic contributor in the country that I actually live in. And I realised too that often companies that we know today can go from zero to $1 billion in value, companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google, not necessarily because they create good products, but it's because they enable their users to create their own versions of success that people find value in what these companies do. And in my successes that I strived for, that I wanted to achieve, I said to myself, I need to be onto this as well. I need to involve people around me. And I can say with my hand on my heart that I invested in the people around me. And I say it with my hand on my heart to you that if you invest in the people around you, the returns will be so much greater. Because this was my secret to raising $100,000 in less than a month. It was my secret to have not one but 2 world tours and to have people await me and be so glad and pleased that something like this, which had never happened before, was happening on a global scale. And even after I developed the books, the success continued, not because I made books. My success continued because I was able to nurture opportunities for people to be able to regain what was stolen from them, to be able to retell their own language in their own words, to be able to pass on the gift from their ancestors onto their children, and to release themselves from the mental shackles of language degradation that had been forced on the Oromo people. I knew that more than in creating these books, I wanted to create something more. A sense for Oromo people that when they saw my products, that they saw that they were loved, they were respected, they were appreciated, and their losses were not in vain. And it was at that point that my successes started to grow. What started off as a poster turned into books, turned into box series sets, cards, stickers, and then expanded. I ended up having animations, cartoons, animators who animated for Sesame Street came on board, wanted to work with me because they were inspired by what I was actually doing across faith, across culture, across politics, across gender. Education was the key that seemed to unite all the Oromo people within Oromia and around the world. And it's interesting because I thought to myself, I'm trying. All I can do is just start with, around me, the circle where I was, start with those children that I was focused on in that school, and people came to me because I was in fact working for them. And all these efforts, they finally got recognised. They got recognised last year when after 150 years, the Ethiopian government invited the Oromo people back into the capital city of Finfinne, which you guys might know as Addis Ababa, to hold their Thanksgiving ceremony for the first time. They invited me to attend as well. And I was excited about it. And when I arrived there, let me tell you, I was blown away. I was taken back. Because I didn't know that people, when I walked on the street, that people would know me. I was overwhelmed. If I told you when I arrived at the airport, people were wearing T-shirts with my names, with my face on it, saying, welcome to our country. Or the fact that I was asked to be on national television and had my speech televised to the whole nation. Or the fact that when I attended the Thanksgiving ceremony, I was there to present myself to them, 7 million people enclosed in one space at the same time. I had the president of the country say, I'd like to meet with you, and say, how can we support you with what we're doing? And what started off, and this was my first post that I made. Remember how I told you when I was in front of those students and I decided to take responsibility? Put this post on Facebook. It's just an idea. I didn't try and change the world. I just focused on what was there in front of me. And I'm proud to say that yesterday, the Bureau of Education of the state of Oromia agreed to enter a memorandum of understanding so that my products, along with theirs, can be available for every single Oromo child. I'm not sure what the future will hold, but from my initial meetings, I've been informed that in my area of specialty, from kindergarten to say grade 4, that there are 1.3 million Oromo registered students. And I think I'm on my way to making my dreams come true. And because the theme of today's TED presentations are future sight, I think it's only appropriate that we share our hindsights and our insights in order to develop our future sights. And that is why I've chosen to share my story with you today. Thank you.